Good evening and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. And as you know, we live in a society that's primarily corporate society, but there's an entire world of non-for-profit, not-for-profit, however you describe it. There's this entire world of nonprofit activity that goes on that helps to make the world we live in what it is. So if you wonder, well, how do those nonprofits get started? How do they get better? What do they do? Or how could I, you the viewer, get involved in a nonprofit? Well, tonight our guest, Natalie Tessler, is here to talk about Compass Pro Bono, the company that you are, the nonprofit that you are the executive director of, and how it fits into this overall nonprofit world. So welcome, Natalie.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So let's take a few moments to describe what Compass is. Most people, I would imagine, have not heard of it. I hadn't till I met you.
Right.
And so what is it, and why do people need to know about it?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, Compass is a nonprofit. I'm not surprised you hadn't heard of it because it's relatively new to the Chicago market, although it was founded about 19 years ago in Washington, D.C., so it's better known on the East Coast. And what Compass does is it actually helps support other nonprofits. And the way that it does that is by pulling people, volunteers from Chicago's business community who want to volunteer their time to help a nonprofit do better. And they use their business skills to help the nonprofits solve a problem.
So it's kind of like a professional networking organization in that sense, that you're trying to get people who have skills connected with the nonprofits that may need those skills, right?
That's exactly right, yes.
But it's all pro bono, as the name would imply, right?
It is. So these are actually, the nature of them is that they're strategic consulting projects, and we use a lot of consultants to work on the projects, but we pull together lots of different expertise from the business community, and we build teams. Each team generally has 9 people working on it, and the people on the team commit to spend about 8 months working together as a team to help the nonprofit solve one of its big strategic challenges. And they are donating their time, and the nonprofit that's receiving their services, that we refer to as the client gets value of about $150,000 worth of paid consulting services, but for free.
That's quite a deal for the nonprofit.
It's a great deal for the nonprofit, and it's not just the benefit of receiving these consulting recommendations that the team will deliver at the end of the project. They also get exposure to the business community. Often the volunteers who are placed on the teams that serve the nonprofit didn't even know that this nonprofit existed prior to the volunteer work. And so there's great exposure there to the business world, and that's really important to nonprofits because they rely on donations to survive in many cases. Some of them have what we call earned income, but the more people that know about their mission and care about it and support it, the better off they are. So there's some ancillary benefits beyond the consulting projects.
So describe like one of these, I mean, if you put together a team of 9 people, which is a fairly big team actually.
Yeah.
What type of problem would they try to address? I mean, with that level of brain power and just sheer number of people, I would think it's a fairly significant issue that they're tackling. So
that's right.
Can you give me an example of what that might be?
Definitely. So when the nonprofits apply to receive one of these consulting projects, they have to choose from one of Compass's service lines. So the service lines are the types of projects that we offer, and they're designed to focus in on some of the biggest challenges that nonprofits confront. So by way of example, we do board development projects. So we'll look at the board of the nonprofit to assess, is it functioning efficiently and effectively? Are the board members engaged? Are they following the bylaws? Are the bylaws the best bylaws for that organization, and so forth? And it involves a really deep dive into the organization and how it's running and how people feel about it and their fundraising efforts and what's working and what's not. So board development would be one example. We do strategic marketing projects. So we look at the organization and whether it is getting its message across as well as it can, and whether it's consistent in its messaging and the methods by which it's delivering their message. You know, the thing about nonprofits is they face all of the same challenges, and arguably more than for-profit businesses. So consulting projects for for-profit companies are often in parallel to those that you would do for a nonprofit. Funding strategies, partnerships and collaborations.
Do you worry, one of the things I would think about is services for free may not be valued as much as services you pay for. So do you worry about that these highly talented teams will come in and do all this work that the nonprofit doesn't have to pay for? Which is good because nonprofits are usually not flush with cash.
That's right.
But do they then appropriately value the service that they're being given here?
Yeah, I mean, that's really insightful of you to say. And
that's why I do this show, because I try to get insightful conversation going.
I'm starting to understand,
okay,
yeah, good job. So, you know, when we are choosing which nonprofits that apply that we will provide the free services for, we do a whole assessment process. So we put together a selection committee and we do interviews with the leadership of the organization. So it's typically the executive director of the organization and the board chair. We interview them separately. We assess how high of a priority is this project to the organization, how committed are they, what other potential conflicts in their schedule might they have, and we make sure that they're really committed to follow through and to be available to the team. You know, they are motivated, one, to get the deliverable. I mean, they're applying because they need to solve some challenge.
They know they have a significant problem that they can't handle on their own.
That's right, or that they don't have the bandwidth, or,
right.
And they, you know, they also want to look good in front of this team of 9 business professionals who may become future board members of the organization, or may evangelize the mission, or might write a check at some point. So it is really important to them that they engage and that the time that they spend is worthwhile, so that at the end they have an outcome that they can actually really benefit from.
And do you have success stories, case studies of these groups, and to show where the organization that you've brought one of these teams into has benefited significantly, or there's been measurable change? I mean, and is that part of what you do? Is that part of what the team does? Like follow-ups to see, well, we went through this whole process, what changed as a result? Is that part of what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. We do follow-up surveys to check in and see, have the recommendations been implemented, and what would you recommend Compass as a resource to other nonprofits, and how did this project help your organization? And there's a lot of ways that nonprofits benefit. It's not always the most obvious. You know, it can be difficult, for example, if we do a board development project, to measure how effective is the board today versus, you know, 2 years from now, and what role did Compass play in that. So a lot of it is anecdotal from the leadership of the organization. I just had a call from a client that we served 3 years ago that we did a board development project for, and he said to me, you know, we got these recommendations from the team, and it took us a while to implement them, but we've made a lot of changes at the board level, and we really relied on the deliverable of the team, the recommendations and so forth, to put those changes into effect. And now, would you guys consider coming back to help us do a board retreat to, you know, instill these, you know, a little bit more deeply in the organization? And so for us, that's a signal that it really was impactful.
Well, I am very interested in that discussion, because I've been on a number of nonprofit boards myself.
Okay.
A school board, I was elected to a school board for 8 years. And several different nonprofit boards. Board dysfunction seems to be the watchword in the nonprofit world, possibly in the corporate world too. I don't know. I haven't been on one of those boards.
Right.
But certainly, and in fact, board development was one of the things I worked on with one of these particular nonprofits, and it was very difficult because the board appeared to want to do something, but when it required individual change, it was a much different story. When certain board members said, well, you need to approach this a little differently, it was easy for them to say, oh, yes, I understand, but the change didn't happen.
Right.
So what is it about the Compass service that's able to get past that normal, which I think is probably a standard thing, resistance to, oh yeah, no, we're all smart people and we know what we're doing, and
Yeah.
and we appreciate your help, but we've been doing it this way for a long time.
Right.
Right. So how do you get past that level of resistance?
You know, it's interesting. I think that a lot of times, you know, boards of nonprofits are made up of business people, right? And they often get stuck, they get in their own way because they have differing opinions amongst one another, and they really believe in their own opinions on things, and they may not know all that much about the day-to-day operations of the organization, but this doesn't stop them necessarily from having strong opinions about the strategic
Yes,
direction.
I've seen that.
You've seen that,
I
yes.
have.
So there is something about bringing in an outside group, especially an outside group of sophisticated business professionals, people who do this professionally for a living. They look at organizational change, you know, management consulting type people. They do get a certain level of appreciation, maybe, that the board perhaps doesn't direct at one another or at the staff of the nonprofit. And I do think that that sort of unbiased, untainted by personal relationships and dynamics, put into a format that's kind of official and backed up with data. You know, these presentations are really, they're quite in depth, and they are supported by data, and the presentations are really thorough, and it can be a great way to unstick an organization, because you say, oh yeah, they really they interviewed, you know, 45 people from the community, from the staff of the organization, from amongst the board members, and it can be hard to argue with those recommendations, and it can often then kind of open the channels. The team also checks in with the organization along the way, so we have like mid-project presentations, we call them, where we give the board a chance to
See where you're going.
see where we're going,
Give you
and
some feedback.
that's right, and then change course if necessary.
And I would think also that just the size of the team you bring in, you're bringing in a group that's in some cases probably as big as the board you're working with. And so it's easy to take one consultant's recommendation and say, yeah, well, you know, what do you know? Thanks.
Right.
See you. But if there are 9, and collectively these 9 have come back and said, you know, with our collective experience and theoretically wisdom, then it's much harder to discount that.
I think that's right. I think that adds extra weight. And I also think that, you know, they're presenting a case, you know, for why. This is what we did to arrive at this conclusion, and this is why we arrived at it. And we looked at other organizations and how they thrive. You know, the work that they do is work that the staff itself and the board itself just doesn't have the time.
They can't get to it.
They can't get to it.
Yeah.
And so it's, I think it really does allow the organization to sit back and be like, you know, I hadn't thought of that, or I didn't know all of that. And again, being an outside group, it's not caught up in personal dynamics, which I think can be one of the biggest challenges.
Yes, my experience is.
Yeah.
It frequently is.
Yeah.
So how does, well, first of all, how did you follow this particular path in life?
Well, I definitely do not come from the nonprofit sector, very much the opposite. Prior to serving as a staff member of Compass, I was an entrepreneur. I'm a former recovered tax attorney.
I've known people who are recovering litigators as well. Right?
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So you understand. And I left that to follow my dream of starting a business, and I opened a spa downtown, and I built and ran that business for almost 20 years and sold it ultimately. I was ready for a change, not necessarily, I mean, certainly not looking to run a nonprofit, but I did suddenly have a lot more free time, and I thought, I want to do something good for the world. I want to give back. And so I started exploring some volunteer opportunities, and there's a lot of day of service type stuff out there, but I really wanted to do something that would tap into my skills and my experience so I could make more of an impact. And then I discovered Compass, and I actually joined a team. I applied to serve on a team, and I was put on a board development project actually for a big charter school system. And I just really fell in love with the mission of the organization, the way that it is taking a resource that is incredibly abundant, which is the skills of business professionals locally. And these people, there are so many who are just eager and willing to set aside some time to make a difference. And it's this really abundant resource, and there's this incredible, almost unlimited need among nonprofits in Chicago. You know, they do such important work for our city. You know, they tackle issues like violence and education and homelessness, et cetera. And, you know, they work really hard every day, and they are really strapped for resources, especially with, you know, government grants being cut and, you know, the landscape of foundation grants changing all the time. It's, you know, they need support. And I feel that, you know, if you have a resource and you have a need, get them together, solve some problems.
Yeah. Yes, in fact, and I know some other nonprofits. There's one in particular, a friend of mine actually is the chair of the board there that helps homeless kids in school. And which is, you know, it turns out, a fairly significant problem here in Chicago. There are far more homeless children in schools than I would ever have imagined. And they face the same issues, you know. And right now they're going through something of a transition that the long-term executive director is retiring. And so now they have to, and this executive director was part of the founding group. So now there's a founder continuity problem that they face as well, which, as you probably know, in many nonprofits, even companies, that's a real issue.
Oh yeah, it's a real issue.
How do you get past that initial founding energy?
Right.
So let me segue for a bit, though. You said you started as a volunteer. So how do people who might be interested in this get involved? How do they become part of these teams?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. We have an application on our website, which is compassprobono.org.
In fact, I think we probably can put that up, compassprobono.org. So we can put that up on the screen.
Yeah, and then if you live in the Chicago area, you would click on Chicago. There's also Compass offices in DC and Philadelphia. But if you were here, you would go to Chicago, and there's a tab for business professionals, and then there's an application that you can click on. Now, we launch all of our projects each year at the same time. So we've just launched 14 projects that will go from now until next May, and then next spring we'll start looking for our next group or cohort of nonprofits, and then we'll choose them and then start really focusing on the volunteers and staffing them with volunteers. But we do have an active link on the Chicago page that allows people to apply to be on the wait list. So sometimes we have a need, a team member has to drop off and the team needs to be kind of reconstituted. So it's, if you're interested, you know, at the off season, you know, like fall or winter, you can fill out that application, and even if you're not placed on the team, it'll put you in the queue for the next round, and you'll be alerted.
Like anyone who's watching the show could apply at any time, right?
They could, yes.
And then as the cycle works its way through, you may look through those lists of people who applied.
That's
and
right.
Think, oh, this is a good fit, or
That's
not.
right. They most likely won't be placed on a project until the beginning of the next cycle, which would be
Makes
next
sense.
fall.
Right.
But as I said, there's a wait list, and sometimes we really do pull from it. It is an active wait list to you know, add folks. And you know, in other cities, they do something called micro projects, which are shorter versions of these projects. And once a city, a Compass city, kind of hits a critical mass with volunteers, it allows them to launch more projects. So the more volunteers we have raising their hand, the more nonprofits we can serve. So more is better, basically.
So what kind of time commitment does a person who volunteers have to be willing to commit to this?
Well, it depends if they're going to serve as a project leader or as a team member. So each team has one project leader and one deputy project leader, and those people commit 3 to 5 hours a week from fall through spring. And then the 7 team members, and those folks commit 2 to 3 hours a week from fall through spring, with breaks for holidays.
Well, that doesn't sound particularly onerous. So
it really isn't. I mean, if you're a full-time management consultant and you're traveling 4 days a week, I mean, you can make it work. We have those folks serving on teams. But you know, if you're somebody who works, you know, 100 hours a week and you're raising, you know, 3 kids,
It
it's
might be
probably
a
not the
little
ideal
tougher.
timing,
Right,
you know.
right.
So
With-
someone with some capacity and,
Yeah.
and a real commitment and a real desire to give back, because we don't want to put people on teams that aren't going to fully engage and commit. It's not fair to the clients, the nonprofit clients.
Or the rest of the team.
Or the rest of the team, sure.
So is it the case that most of the, maybe all of the people on these teams are currently employed and actively working on things, or are they retired people, or are they, you know, entrepreneurs who've cashed out, or what? I mean, what does the group look like?
Yeah, it's really a mix. In fact, I would say the vast majority are employed full-time, but we definitely have a contingency of people who are somewhat newly retired and want to keep active and use those skills. We have some people that are looking to re-enter the job force after some period outside of it, often moms who have stayed at home for some period of time, but they're, you know, well educated, they have strong strategic skills, and Compass can be a great way actually for them to refresh some of their skills, get current on technology and what people are using to communicate, and tools that are current, and also add something more current to their resume. So we get a decent number of those as well. And when we build the teams, we try to create diversity on those teams in terms of experience level and types of skills and you know, all your traditional diversity considerations.
All right. So so if you have, I think you said 14 projects that will go.
Yeah.
Compass somehow has to manage those 14 projects,
Yes.
right? So that seems like quite a task for Compass itself, right? So how do you do that? How do you keep an eye on all these projects, make sure they're going the way they need to go?
Yeah, well, you know, as I mentioned, Compass has been around for about 18 years, and it was founded in DC by a group of friends who had gone to business school together, and they were living in DC working as consultants. And actually, when 9/11 happened, and the idea actually came out of 9/11 and the need of nonprofits that they were looking to find a way to help support.
Well, because nonprofits really took a big hit after 9/11.
They took a big hit, and there was such a huge demand for certain of their services.
Right, at a time when funding dried up.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And so they thought, well, maybe we can be most effective by actually using our consulting skills to help them solve the kinds of challenges that we help for-profits solve. And that's how it got started. And so the group of people who kind of developed the program and then refined the program were very sophisticated, really good at process improvement.
Yes.
And they designed it in such a way that actually once the projects are up and running, which they're about to be right now, they run themselves largely. We put in place like critical deadlines, I guess, along the way. They have to like sign an engagement letter with the nonprofit client by a certain date. And we give examples of past engagement letters that they can use as forms. But you know, they really do the work on their own. These people are grown-ups, you know.
Yes.
They're very well educated and experienced, and the project leaders really commit to, you know, driving the bus. Compass just makes sure that things are on track, and if things get off track, Compass is there to be supportive. But, you know, the teams really drive the process.
So I assume the Compass role is largely in the setup phase, right? And then once the projects are launched, as you say, these are adult professionals
right.
who know what they're doing.
Yes.
How do you manage conflict within the teams? I'm sure that happens.
You know, I've only been witness to 2 complete rounds, and now we're starting our 3rd round. It's not a big issue, believe it or not. And you know, what I've come to realize about Compass volunteers is that they have 2 big things in common. One is that they're really, really smart, and and I'll move to 2. 2 is that they really care about the world and they want to make it better. So they tend to be like very compassionate, patient people who are good to one another.
So there's
you
a
know?
self-selection process that goes on
very much
here,
so.
where
Very
the
much
people
so.
who might be troublesome generally don't apply.
That's right. They wouldn't even think to apply. You know, some of the channels that we kind of promote the Compass Volunteer Opportunity through are MBA alumni clubs. We do have a lot of MBAs that participate. And so the MBA Alumni Club will put out a newsletter to its network. And, you know, the type of person who opens their newsletter and reads it carefully and sees a volunteer opportunity that's significant and meaningful, you've already like really narrowed down the marketplace to that type of person. And then to take the further step of doing some research and filling out the application, you know, and the same thing, we work with a lot of companies around Chicago to recruit volunteers, and it's generally done by the company circulating a volunteer opportunity with a description about it, and the people who show up are people who are just so hungry to do something good for the world, and that's a very specific type of person who doesn't tend to be high conflict. I mean, I'm sure there are things, but again, it's really unusual for us to get a phone call like, I just can't work with this person. You know, they work it out.
Yeah, again, they're professionals.
Yeah,
right?
they are.
And they find a way to make it work.
That's right.
Yeah, I can understand that. Now, with the volunteers, do you have an interview process or a screening process of some sort? I mean, yes, it is self-selecting and then anyone, but really anyone can apply.
Yeah.
And there would always be, I think, in any given population, there's some subset that may not be a good fit.
Right.
So how do you determine that?
Yeah. Well, we always start with the project leaders. And as I said, there's 2 per team, a main project leader and a deputy. We try to pull those first from past volunteers who have been very successful on previous projects. That's a great place to get them. And then we also recruit those primarily through some of our partners, our recruitment partners, like specific schools that we have partnered with to help recruit, and specific companies. And then we do in-depth interviews with those people in person and select those first. We don't interview the whole pool. We had over 200 applications this round for less than 150 positions. So we're reading
it's a nice
resumes.
problem to have, though, right?
It is. It's a great problem to have. And the places that from which we're recruiting tends to deliver high caliber people because they've had their own selection process before, you know, a top tier company hires this person, or a top MBA program admits this person. So the applications that come in tend to be pretty high caliber.
Now, the event I attended, where I met you, in fact, which was an alumni event, there were a number of, I'll call them booths, but they weren't really just stations, where nonprofits had set up to explain what they do.
Yes.
So that is another recruiting method that you use, right?
That's right.
But how does that translate? You know, people walk around and say, oh, I like this, you know, these guys sound pretty cool.
Yeah.
How does that translate into someone actually becoming a volunteer on a project that would affect that group?
Yeah, so we have, it's called a project launch.
And you have about 30 seconds to explain that one.
So we have a project launch, and the intent is for the people who attend to meet these nonprofit leaders, learn a little bit about the organizations, because when they apply, they rank the projects based on their interest level. And we pay close attention to that when we're putting people on teams. We want them to work on a team that they feel really connected to and driven by the mission.
Great way to sum up, right?
Okay, thank you.
Natalie, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. It's been
informative
great.
to me, and I wish you the best of luck in recruiting both nonprofits and volunteers to work on them.
Thank you very much. We're excited to grow and make an impact.
And I want to thank you for joining us once again on Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. You can find us every Saturday night at 8 on Comcast Channel 19, or see us on the web at publicperspective.tv. So until next time, thank you and good night.